Ṣẹ̀kẹ̀rẹ̀ lọ bá jó, ṣẹ̀kẹ̀rẹ̀ lọ bá jó, olúwa mi ò dìde ojú
Ashen Forge.
ṣẹ̀kẹ̀rẹ̀.
The Ashen Forge.
Hello and welcome to the Ashen Forge. I am Phantom X, joined as always by Diggs and the legendary Neurotoxin. How y'all doing?
Great.
Doing all right.
We had a big stream to cover artisanship stuff. I mean, that was what, 2 hours, 2.5 hours? I don't even remember.
It was a big stream.
Sorry, my stuff's going off in the back there.
Yep.
Yeah, I actually just finished it today. I didn't get to watch it live. So I had to take sort of broken 20 minutes here, 30 minutes there. But tons of stuff packed in there. It's a really pretty fun stream to watch. I'm super excited. I guess the other thing we should even start off with, I didn't even think about this, is the announcement of Alpha 2 spot testing, which we don't think we talked about that last time, right? Because that was announced after?
Maybe the day before. Maybe it was the day before in Discord when we found out about that. Yeah.
But I am just super, super pumped about getting the chance to finally get in here, especially with this loop now placed in. So, but yeah, I think we can start. This is a lot. You had all of it.
Come on now. You can't just leave them on that. Tell people what the date is.
Yeah.
Do what?
Tell people about spot testing. You said there was a mention, but you didn't see what the mention was.
I'm sorry. My mind is going a little bit everywhere. Yeah. So it has started, which is hilarious because when we had Steven on in July, just directly asked him. There's even a GIF that floats around of him saying, like, NDA spot testing has begun. That was from our interview because he said, no, not going to, we won't tell you that. And here he is on Discord. I guess a side effect of Maggie moving away, not there to physically stop him. But yeah, they've officially started, I assume, with Phoenix Initiative folks. We'll start bringing in Alpha 1. He said December. So I am kind of fingers crossed that, it's this week that we start seeing some invites come out to us. But I don't know. I guess we'll see. We can't say Diggs was right again. Come on now.
Well, the interesting part of it for me was he normally always would tell us. He would, but what he told us when he was on the show was, well, if you put on a marketing hat, which totally means that's totally for Maggie saying, hey, look, you really shouldn't announce it, but, deep in his heart, Steven wants to share that information with us. So that was very amusing. Yeah.
But super looking forward to it. Gosh, I think, but they also said they're taking the last 2 weeks off, I think, of December is what he said. The studio closed. So spot testing's real. Not going to be a 24/7 server. It's going to be here and there. So as it should be.
Yeah, so that does mean we should be getting their stream maybe like on the 21st or the 22nd. I think they said that they won't have anybody in the office on the 22nd. They could meet after the 22nd. So I guess we're getting that next stream. They didn't actually say the date, but I would guess that means around the 21st or 22nd, something like that.
Yeah, and it's not going to be their sort of year-end recap either. So it's something. I think everybody in Discord at least is assuming it's going to be the Ranger.
I think that's what he said.
So, but I thought that was hilarious after he just explicitly told us, no, we wouldn't announce that. And here he was on Discord. I think he's just wanting to join in the PAX Day fun and everything else that's going on. Hey, we're testing just like everyone else. So we'll see. Project Awakening also starts this week, so there'll be some complicated decisions to make if an Ashes of Creation email goes out at the same time. So
I think,
and with all of that, I'm also
Chronicles-
waiting on Soulframe to start coming around here pretty soon.
Yep.
I
Also
signed
this
up
month.
way early with that one, so hoping to be among the first few waves.
Yeah. Also this month. This whole last quarter has just been crazy with testing. I mean, when you look back, Blue Protocol, Throne and Liberty, what's it, Tarisland, PAX Day, Ashes of Creation. I mean, all of the big games are fine, which is just such weird timing because I feel like typically when we get to the holidays, test that nobody really does testing. But here we are. So it's a good time to be a gamer, I guess. Of course, this has also now restarted all of the conversations about when Alpha 2 will actually start. There's a lot of people convinced it's Q1 now, because why would they start spot testing if, it's not going to be in January, February? I still think it'll be Q3, towards the end of Q3, but I have a feeling Steven's going to want to make sure that they have any big issues sorted out before they let people get in and stream it all. So
Ranger is supposed to be December, and then January, I think, is supposed to be PvP with caravans. And what they said was they were always planning to split it, just because there's so much with caravans that they felt it was better to do part 1 without PvP, and they'll have PvP for part 2, which they're hoping they'll be able to do in January.
They have
if it's ready.
They have felt it's been better to do everything without PvP at this point. So
true.
I do not take that as an excuse.
But will Steven turn on his invincibility or not? Will it be true PvP, or will there be cheater armor PvP?
Well, it kind of, here's what I think with that is that it's actually part of the reason might be they're going to have testers in, right? So if you have spot testing, I could very well see Steven saying, hey, get in here. We're going to record this. If you want to be on it, come join us. So I imagine there might be something like that, or a few people, maybe not everyone, but
maybe he'll just be the driver.
I start to wonder, is the Phoenix Initiative after we get to Alpha 2 actually even worth it to join if you haven't yet? I'm curious. I've been thinking about that. Anyways, I don't know.
Well, I mean, you're at the name your NPC level, right? So I don't know that there's much of a reason to go higher than that.
Yes, I did finally upgrade so that Diggs can have a character in the game forever, that people can come and get cake from. But it puts me not too far away from Phoenix Initiative, so that's where that question comes from. Different show. We got other stuff to talk about. So I don't know for sure they're going to let me put Diggs' name in there. I have asked and was not really given a direct answer. It was more of we don't know what we're going to do with it right now. We're not at that stage of development yet, but that is the plan. So, all right. Well, let's get to what we are. What?
I have a question before you start your questions.
Sure.
Because you asked a question, both you and Phantom had questions answered, but I understood Phantom's question. I didn't understand your question, and I'm not sure if they answered it. So what was your question, and did you get a answer that you were hoping to get?
For my question?
No, sorry, Phantom's question.
Oh, yes and no. Yeah, they gave a great answer. It wasn't necessarily what I was looking for, but worth it nonetheless.
So what was your question?
So it was more so the New World problem where you still have perks. You can be max level crafter and you really have limited control over stat lines and things like that.
I know what you mean. Okay.
What you get out of it. Now, after seeing the crafting video, it looks like we actually will get some of that control based off of what resources we use. But that was the actual original intent was, where would they take that sort of randomness out of it because I think that just makes sense as a crafter. If you get better, you should not continue to have the same amount of unpredictability in what you're doing. Now, Stephen took it more in the crafting failure realm, which I think was a fine answer. Actually, I hadn't even thought of it in that way. But that was news that new news actually, that there would be no failure in crafting. You will always succeed versus some of the other, enchanting, you can fail, and deconstruction, it sounds like there's some sort of ability to fail or something like that. So
I think, again, too, the kind of disconnect there is there's kind of a difference in the mechanics of an RPG crafting system and a survival game crafting system. So what New World is doing, I would not expect to see that form of RNG in an RPG, specifically because the whole point of building up your character is building up your skills so that you're overcoming the RNG. It doesn't get rid of RNG completely necessarily, but it should mean that you can build your character in a way that you're more likely to get whatever successes you're looking for, which might not be a failure, but it is supposed to be that you can build your character to be much better. And New World isn't really an RPG. It has some RPG elements, so I'm not surprised their crafting is very different. But okay, now I see why you were driven to make that question, because we don't want the New World crafting system in Ashes for sure.
No, and that's the whole. Actually, we'll get to crafting eventually, but like a completely different model, which is, I think, really going to be fun to explore in Alpha 2. But before we actually get through all of that, we kind of talked about expectations last time. So what were your overall impressions? Like, was this a good stream? Was this could have been better? Pretty happy with what you saw from an artisanship perspective?
I like being able to see all of these systems that they've been talking about for, months, years now, actually starting to come together. The bigger side of them, the smaller side of them, how you gather for specificity, what it means to specialize and prepare to go gathering or to go processing, the different equipments that you put on that will help with your different craft skills. The fact that you've got the ability to do, was it 2 Grandmasters, is 3 or 4 Masters, 4 Journeymen, and 6 Apprentice, and you can be novice and everything else. That's fantastic. That now changes everything for me, because now I'm kind of thinking of not only doing the Master Bowcraft or Grandmaster Bowcraft, it would also be seeing if I can do Grandmaster Enchanting alongside that, so I can actually make the anti-corruption enchantments and specialize in that. I'll be very, very reliant on others to provide me the materials for top-tier crafting, but the hope is for players at lower levels that want to be able to put something on that can help them get a bit more of an edge against the corruption in their area. When I hear that there's corruption building up in a place, make 20, 30 mid-tier bows with my high-level skills, enchant them up with mid-tier enchantments using my high-level skills, ship them out, have someone sell them, bring me back some gold, or just go ship them out there myself. Since they're complete items, I don't have to worry about losing them to being ganked, so that's awfully nice. And so when I finally get there, I can just repair any damage from being ganked along the way and proceed to sell these lovely, wonderful anti-corruption bows to mid-level players to help them fight in the area. Likewise, pad my pockets a little bit, and I'm sure there'll be a little bit of skill gain in the process and experience in the process of having done it. So it's a nice sort of thing to be able to do and to think about like the economy of scale that I can potentially gather all of the mid-tier stuff that I would need to make mid-tier stuff, but likewise be specializing to the point where when top-tier guilds are like, yo, we want to be able to fight the corruption in a big way, and they start throwing legendary, top-tier mastercraft resources at me to make their stuff with, suddenly I'm able to make, the best damn anti-corruption weapons in the game. If they're going to go ganking the Gankers with it, great. Go bounty hunting. I'd love to see that. If you're mostly going after the ancients and corrupted areas, fantastic. Well, you'll have a nice weapon to use at a good distance. I might also be able to enchant your other weapons with the anti-corruption stuff I specialized in. But in terms of making a weapon, it's going to be a bow. You walk into my shop, it's, hi, what kind of bow do you want against the corruption?
Yeah.
Do we have the name for enchanting? Is that what we're calling it? Is that under gathering?
He referred to it as enchanting in the video.
Yeah.
He said, getting your potions for enchanting. So
yeah, and I was thinking that would. Yeah, it's just not in the list, I think. I'm looking at the list on the wiki, and I don't see enchanting listed there.
Does it have all 22 of them on there?
I'm not sure if it's 22.
He said he saw 22 in the video.
Yeah, it could be close. It looks like it. I haven't counted. Yeah, I was because I had forgotten that we had a list. So I was just looking at it Thursday or Friday. Friday or Saturday, what I don't know. Because I had forgotten or did not realize that taming is under the hunting. Hunting is under gathering, and taming is a subset of hunting. It's not its own separate profession. So if you're going to go into animal husbandry as processing, you're probably likely going to want to do hunting for your gathering profession and get taming under there. And so that's the thing too. I'm kind of glad that there's 2 grandmasters, because that means that you can do things like be a grandmaster hunter, grandmaster animal husbandry guy, and kind of synergize your grandmasters that way. And kind of the same thing for lumberjacking and lumber milling. So I think that's a good choice to have 2 grandmasters, and then you'll be able to synergize those if you want to some degree.
That was a change, right? That was a big change that was discussed in the Discord quite a bit. Actually, was the fact that you do not have to be in the same group. You can be. You can have a grandmaster in harvesting, and you can have a grandmaster in crafting. Before, you sort of had to stay within that path. And so there was some chatter about that. I do like it this way.
Yeah, there was definitely stay within the path, but I think that was one of the things that was nebulous is there's all of the skills here, and there's your Grandmaster peak or whatever at the top, and then it was this whole nebulous what do you get in between? And in the process of solidifying this pile of wobbly jelly into something cohesive, they figured out, well, maybe we should be doing 2 grandmasters, 2, 3, 4, 6, and then 22. So, along the way, you're going to be able to, from that 22, you're only going to be having 16 of them that are going to remain novice maximum. Of those 6, 2 of them are only going to be apprentice maximum. Of those 4 remaining, you're going to have the wait, am I doing my math wrong? I think I'm doing my math wrong.
What do you mean?
Of those 4, because you're going to have it was 6 apprentice, 4 journeyman.
I think it's 2 grandmasters and 5 masters.
There's like
No,
two,
no,
three.
it's 22. So all you can be a novice of all 22. You can be apprentice of 5. You can be a journeyman of 4.
Mm.
You can be a master of 3 and a grandmaster of 2.
Yeah, I was squishing everything down. No, it's so that's great because that's a lot of range actually. Now that I'm looking at things the right way, yeah, 6, 4, 3, and 2. So you're gonna have more things that aren't novice than that are if you max out all of your crafting, which is nice. It's nice to be able to be well rounded like that.
That is not the case. So the way it was described by Roshan, what I heard from you. Maybe I was wrong. So you actually will still have, what is that? 17 professions that can never go above novice or novice.
17. Okay.
Because to get to, for example, to have 2 grandmaster, in order to get to that grandmaster, it had to have been master first.
Oh, okay. So it was the first way I was going with it. That of the 22, you would have the, I guess it would be 16. That you can always, yeah.
So you can't have like 2 grandmaster and then 3 completely different master. The way it was explained in Discord, you have to progress through the master in order to get to grandmaster. So
okay. Well, then that's that's a good thing because it'll give enough people enough specificity, but at the same time it'll give enough room for people to not be entirely reliant on other people for absolutely everything. If I can use tier 3 fuel for most tier 5 crafting, that's great. Then I don't need more than journeyman level gathering to be able to get my fuel.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and still with general progression is how, which I find interesting, is just the, since we're talking about sort of tiers, that you do have to have the node government structure, even for harvesting, has to have, what was it? We saw an agricultural supply, which was something that the mayor of the node decided to put up in order to be able to get that harvesting equipment to be able to even do the quests and buy. So you can't just, it sounds like, start in the middle of nowhere and go harvest. Like you have to actually have a node where, because the quest anyways was through this agricultural supply in order to get the novice. What did he get? A sickle or something, axe.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I just how it's all tied. Your processing's tied to that. Your crafting, like everything's going to come down to what the mayor of the node decides to do and build, as far as what you will be able to do from an artisan perspective. So it's like so granular, so narrow. It's. I'm curious how this will all work. Now they did say later on they expect that most places will have up to journeyman, like harvesting and processing.
That's what I was going to say. You don't have to get it right there. So it doesn't have to be from your specific node that you're a citizen of. Just somewhere on the server, you have to be able to go somewhere. Somewhere on the server has to have built that.
But I find it interesting that progression is tied, even for like harvesting, is tied to the node decisions. You maybe have a node where you can get your novice, but you don't have a building that's upgraded to go to journeyman. And so you have to go find somewhere else that allows you to do that. So a lot of interdependencies. It's such a clearly complex game as we kind of move forward through all this.
It actually leans itself to there being trade specific towns and trade specific nodes that you
and guilds.
Yep. And yes, that Grogus, you bring up something very important. The most important 3 words of that stream were wars, galaxies, and star. That was the thing that was, not in that order. Because that was one of the better systems I've ever experienced. And for them to be taking a lot of influence with it, the way they described things in the last 15 minutes of the video and the crafting part and how that all works being able to put in the higher quality materials to get the higher quality version of something, to be able to put in the material variants to be able to get the different outcomes and outputs. I would imagine there might even be the ability to mix, like, instead of replace 5 units with 5 units, you would mix like 3 units of one and 2 units of the other, and you would be able to come up with some attribute midpoint sort of thing between the 2 variants that you would have created. That's the sort of thing that excites me, is seeing what all we can do with that sort of thing. And what happens if I take I don't know, the most mastercraft pure copper ingot, and I'm using that to make artisan, low-level artisan tools. Am I going to make one that's so good that lower-level people won't even be able to use it, or will it be the very best thing that a lower-level person will be able to use, and that it'll have a little bit of a niche market in that respect? So that's, that, or, what if I use a little bit of this and that? Can I make my alloys on the fly? Can I mix in a little bit of tin, mix in a little bit of, nickel, a little bit of this and that or whatever to get a bit of a different alloy that I'm making a better piece of equipment with? And, how's that all going to play out? Another one there, Omi there, animal husbandry. I mean, just knowing that that's where Dr. Bucky got his PhD, I'm really excited to see how that all plays out. It sounds like a very, very interesting system that's going to have a lot of ins and outs, a lot of play, from your pets to your, resource animals to your riding things, and your, you can ride them, but they're mostly for fighting and ramming into stuff. All of your sorts of things, your very special haul-in mules that you can get for specifically caravan stuff. All of that's going to be great. That'll all be fantastic. This is a crafting system that is compelling enough, I think, in its own right, that if you didn't actually have the node system and it was still just more of a static sandbox sort of game, it would still be, big deal, real fun, real engaging sort of system for the players. The fact that it has all of the other layers on top of it, that's the chef's kiss. It's going to be real exciting.
Well, I want to keep talking about this because this is one of the things that I had wrote down too, that was super exciting and not really discussed a ton because of how, the stream was already long. So, but definitely the whole required versus selectable stuff just looks incredibly interesting. And the way Steven sort of described it was, recipes support various stats and play styles because everyone can wear anything. And so you have to have sort of a system where if Diggs has a specific class that requires, a magic defense, but I need physical defense, we can both have the same recipe, but because of that selectable part, end up with stats that favor me or him, which is just super interesting. I'm trying to think of any modern game that has this sort of technique where you're not just learning a recipe that's only producing one item. You're learning, essentially multiple products off of one recipe that you get to discover, which is going to be a lot of fun.
Maybe EverQuest 2 or something? I remember it had a similar crafting system to Vanguard. Vanguard Saga of Heroes definitely had that sort of as going on. There was a lot of modularity to it. You could do a lot of mixing and matching and come out with different outcomes. My favorite was being the goon that does world first on all the items people wouldn't use, like swords with int and staffs with strength.
Yeah. No, it's just a fascinating. I'm excited to explore because it's also, like, can we, if it calls for a metal, can you use 2 metals? Like, do you have to use one? Is it only zinc, or can you use, as you say, a do alloy? I'm also curious when Steven added those medals, they were legendary. So like what made them legendary? I assume that's just sort of the demo. They were going to give him legendary or whatever, just to show that progression from uncommon to rare to heroic of the item. But like, how do you get that? Like, is that a quality within the resource itself? Like, do you skill up in your harvesting and through the skill tree, through your choice of tool, of clothing? Like, is that how you then can get a legendary zinc ore versus just a common zinc ore? Like, there's so many questions that come up that I'm really excited to kind of get in there and figure all this out. Diggs, you were about to say something. I think I interrupted you.
Yeah, so it's you never interrupt me. I always interrupt you. Yeah, I think I would imagine that the artisan clothing that you're wearing would give you perks that would or boons that would help you get to legendary mining of a particular ore. Yeah, and that you would be able to level up your stats that would help you do that. But what was the other thing that I was thinking about? There's something related with that that now I can't remember. New World. New World does let you use items to choose your stats when you're crafting. It doesn't really help with perks. Those are kind of RNG, but you were able to determine what stats your weapon and gear would have based on what little different reagents you added in. So yeah, I hope we get some of that. That would be really good.
So, and tied in.
That's kind of what we're hoping for, is that not only do you boost your stats, right, and with your levels or whatever, but also you have some player knowledge of if I'm going to use gold, that's going to give me this kind of buff. If I use silver instead, that's going to give me this kind of buff. That's a fun part of crafting.
Interestingly, the example they gave, which was the Nightblade, did not have a level attached to it. So as its rarity went from common to rare to heroic, it wasn't like a level 10 required, level 15 required. And I don't know if that's just not implemented yet, but there wasn't sort of this level. The stats clearly changed. But yeah, the other example they gave was like using oak, ash instead of oak in that recipe would turn it into like a brutal knife blade that comes with its own sort of sets of stat blocks and things. It's so interesting to figure out this process. I assume there'll be all kinds of online databases eventually, but in addition, part of what they only touched on, and I really wish they would have spent more time. I didn't get to watch this live, or I probably would have asked this question. They talked about having recipe experience. So, we sort of, you take the WoW model, right? To get from one place to the other, you're crafting like, 20 swords, and you're just sort of, but in this instance, you're actually getting experience, it sounds like, per recipe. And then that opens up sub recipes. Which I don't know if sub recipes are different from just free form. Hey, I'm going to put, copper in here instead of zinc and see what happens. Like, do you actually get some sub recipe that you couldn't get just through experimentation? I wish they had spent more time kind of talking about that component, because I've the idea of a recipe itself earning experience is interesting.
I was a little bit disappointed to learn that failure is not a thing that's possible in these part of the crafting, because one of the things I loved about my favorite single player mmorpg of all time, Kingdoms of Amalur Reckoning, was the alchemy. And you kind of had to play with your reagents. So you would combine different reagents, and that's how you would learn over time what combinations would give you specific effects. But sometimes your experiment would blow up in your face. And, rolling a 1 is kind of fun sometimes. Or maybe you do something and you don't even know what the outcome is going to be until you use it. That kind of stuff is kind of fun. So I wish we did have roll
we
one.
do have that.
It's with enchanting, but I wish it was true with some of the crafting stuff as well. Maybe you don't always know what you're doing.
I like that. Crafting will always succeed specifically because there's so many goddamn sinks along the way that it'd be a shame for all of that to come out to something, all of that economic input for the potential for a non-viable output. That's not okay. Once you've got a viable unit of output, then what you do with it, that's up to you. If you want to try pushing the limits with the enchanting, well, find your best enchanter and, give them the best materials. I didn't say it was
non-viable. It just might not do what you want it to do.
Oh, so you're saying not a failure as in it not being crafted. You're saying a failure as in it not coming out with the outcomes that you hope for.
No, and more importantly, it could be, more detrimental than beneficial. It's not useless. It's not broken. It's not like you can't use it, but it's not doing exactly what you wanted to do, and maybe it's not the best thing that you wanted. But what's the other thing? Oh, the Nightblade. So I was kind of thinking as I was watching through, I was just by the name of it, I wasn't paying too close attention, but I was expecting it was going to turn into a dagger, a Nightblade. Like that sounds like something that a rogue would use. So I was expecting a dagger, and then it turned out into this big fucking ass sword. And we've got a thread in the forums about will there be oversized weapons, and there is a quote about how Steven said he didn't want them to be too oversized, and then that Nightblade popped out.
Yep. Here's a giant rapier for some reason.
Larger than a person's body. Like, you can't sheath that on your back and be running down the road with it. I'm like, I'm not totally turned off by the WoW weapons that are super huge, but for hearing an answer that, Ashes is not going to have those, that came pretty fucking close to being. I don't know how you can get any bigger than that. That was pretty huge. Again, I don't know how you sheath that thing. How do you sheath? Are we going to have sheathing in Ashes? Because and then I was looking at the axe. I mean, I started looking at the other swords. I was like, yeah, they're like holding those suckers over their shoulder when they're resting. That's not oversized.
Well, I like the two-handers. They run with them like this, right? Just holding it up. Yeah. Like there's no strapping it on. It's just running with it, holding it up.
You can't get too much bigger than that. I don't know.
No physics there. I guess since we're on crafting too, the story arc progression, I mentioned something in chat about this, sounds very interesting as well, that they're going to tie in order to get your certifications. There'll be some sort of story arc attached to all these things. I'm super curious to see what a Grandmaster, because I assume I don't know, apprentice to journeyman's like probably a small story, and but once you get to journeyman to master and master to grandmaster, like how complex are these story arcs going to be? Like that would be very interesting to see. And also it sounds like that's one of the considerations, because this was a question afterwards about manual crafting, because nobody, we've been told we're going to have this, Steven doesn't like the word crafting mini game. It's manual crafting. And I guess he said in the answer was, they're still considering whether to make this actually like a per item process manual crafting, or if it's just going to be tied into the certification or storyline, that in order to become a grandmaster, you have to manually do that. And everything else is just kind of the fast crafting method. So how complex?
We got a good question. Yeah. Read that.
How what's it say? Complex would you like them to be? How complex would you like them to be? I mean, if you're going to put the time and effort into it, then complex. I mean, otherwise, what's the point, right? I mean, that's an honest answer. Like if it's nothing, if it's for me as a player, if it's a dumbass waste of time, like then why even do it? Like if you're,
I would say as they scale up, they need to be probably more and more situational and opportunity based rather than there's just somebody waiting for you. So if the place is leveled up to a certain tier, there's just someone waiting. There is also an aspect that I think it would be nice for players to be able to train other players 2 tiers below. So if I'm a grandmaster, I could train as high as a journeyman, but I'm not sure how that would work out in some questy sort of format or what the deal would be with that. I would imagine it's going to be more like your journeyman would be maybe part of a mayoral request system that, you know, if you're only an apprentice, journeyman testing is being offered, something like that. Maybe to go from journeyman to master, it has to be like a real critical situation. There's like 2 NPC camps out somewhere in a high tier area, and they're like, look, we have way too many soldiers here. We have plenty of resources, but we don't have enough weapons. And we need damn good weapons. We're going to feed you a pile of materials, and you keep throwing weapons on the table here. And once we have, 5 swords and 5 shields or whatever, that's another squad we can send out. And so you're actively supplying the front line of a battle. You're sitting there doing this for, maybe 2-3 hours or something as part of an event. And then afterwards, or the event's 2 or 3 hours, and you're there for maybe 15 minutes to an hour or whatever. And then afterwards, they remembered who you are, and somebody approaches you, or you get mail or whatever about, hey, you did a really good job. If my arm wasn't busted, blah blah blah, I would have been right there with you. Here, let me teach you some new techniques to help you, get better at all this. And that leads into your master, and then potentially the grandmaster. It's, somewhere in the middle of Carfin, someone finds a book written in a funky language, and someone's able to translate it, and turns out, oh, this is like a grandmaster tome, but you still need to find like, a so-and-so or whatever, or the certain sort of crafting station out in the wild or whatever that you have to bring it to, and then you can speak to the spirits of the grandmaster or whatever, and very, very tricky sort of business to get started sort of thing. I'd like to see that sort of stuff with it. It could be, scalable in a lot of different ways, offered in a lot of different ways, have different sorts of time commitments to them, different levels of being out on the active front of something going on, whether it's battle or, a big frontier crafting sort of, harvesting push. That's, go ahead.
I think a grandmaster, I think it should be a monumental achievement, right? It's the apex of, and it's highly specialized in what you're grandmastering in. So, things that come to mind, but when I think of this is things like the EverQuest 2 original, story specializing into your class type. So you could specialize further down in your class, and each time you had a story in a pretty complicated, and at times, at least in vanilla, very difficult encounters at times in order to progress. I think of things like EverQuest, legend, epic weapons, like things that just take multiple steps. Grandmaster shouldn't be super easy to get. There equally shouldn't be that many people that can teach you how to be a grandmaster. So, I would think you would be sent various different places to go find this. When you mention the Tower of Carfin, my immediate thought was, well, no, I would not want to see a crafting advancement tied into a combat scenario. My pure heart as a crafter thinks that I shouldn't have to go raiding in order to learn how to be a better crafter. But then I kind of think about the fun you had with like EverQuest 1 and Epic Weapons and having to gather a group of people in order to go get the piece that you needed in order to, go to the next step. I actually get a little less sort of like, no, you can't do that. And more so like, oh, well, that might be interesting. You might have to get your guild together to help you go somewhere in a raid and get a piece, learn something. Or maybe that is where the Grandmaster is located in a dungeon somewhere. And then the neat things that can come out of that are the differences in nodes. Again, I don't know how complex this is. I would love to have Humble on to talk about stories and just how do you write these things knowing that the world changes, states change. Because the other part that would be fun, if possible, is that I might start an alt, and for whatever reason, I decide to Grandmaster in the same thing. But it's a completely different process because that original Grandmaster that I spoke to and learned from is no longer there because the node collapsed, 6 months ago, and now it's somewhere else. That just adds to that sort of interesting part to this. The other part that I think you go big on this is that, at the core of Ashes, what makes this whole thing run is artisanship. That is the whole reason for PvP. That is the whole reason for nodes. Your crafting is really the core at all this. And so I think it would be fun to have that sort of complexity for crafters and gatherers and processors and not just the sort of combat focused people.
I would kind of hope that your different, the different racial NPCs who are sending you out on the different Grandmaster would have different stories. You'd have racial stories behind being a Grandmaster versus that, and maybe you can go study somehow. I don't know if you'd have to go through the whole thing, but I would hope you would also go visiting because you want to learn some new cultural stuff. But yeah, I don't think I would want to have those gated by raids, possibly by dungeons. But yeah, it would be cool to have to get your buddies to go with you to go to a different region, possibly that's in a different biome, all kinds of stuff. So that could be a lot of fun.
Yeah,
I have different stories across the globe based on.
As a guild, I mean, your artisans are gonna be the people that you want to protect because that's what's going to get you your money. That's what's going to get you your fame is being able to craft and do all of these things. So,
well, I don't know why people always put it in terms of protection because it's not like you necessarily need protection. Just because you don't like PvP doesn't mean that you're not good at it. But I'm just thinking of the adventure. Right? I mean, people, it doesn't have to be about protection. Just, hey, I'm going across the continent or I'm going to cross the seas. You want to come with me and have an adventure? And there'll be a bunch of different stuff over there.
Yeah.
I mean,
corruption changes things. Maybe to be a Grandmaster, you have to actually allow an area to become corrupted. So instead of the fighting back and doing the events to keep corruption away, no, you actually have to, as a group, promote corruption and have that. What was that ancient thing that Stephen cursed at? There was something.
The ancients?
No, there was that monster.
I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. They said what
Somebody
it was.
Thought it was an ancient.
Yes, ancient horror. Maybe you actually have to promote corruption in order. I don't know. I just would like to see something pretty complex rather than. Just go see this person and ding, you're a Grandmaster. You can do whatever now. So
I think technically you're not supposed to be encouraged to want corruption to appear. I don't think that will officially be a thing. Certain people who want to foment chaos might decide to try and go down that path, but
a good question for Stephen, I guess, and another way to sort of look at how complex this should be was, so I guess, what is the expected percentage of people to become Grandmasters? Like, is this something that everyone is expected to be able to do eventually? Or is this really something that is actually so challenging that you're only talking 5-10% of your player base is ever going to Grandmaster in something. I think that would sort of also dictate a little bit on the complexities and just how, because if this is something that's actually not that difficult, then okay, you might not want some big quest line that you have to go, to 5 different nodes to achieve. But if it really is something super special that when someone actually advances to Grandmaster, it's a big deal, then I think you just would want to make it feel like a big deal.
You can only get to Grandmaster after you hit level 50 in Adventure because you have to have a freehold.
Do what now?
I'm saying, do we have to, in order to get to Grandmaster, do we first have to get to level 50 Adventure because that's the only way you can get a freehold? Is Grandmaster?
Well, you'd be a family member.
Max level content. I know. I'm just throwing that
and
out
that's
there.
Just
based on
processing.
what we learned about freeholds. Based on what we learned about freeholds.
I mean, that's just processing. I mean, you can still theoretically do it just fine, and if you have the right crafting node. So this is going to be a lot of fun to sort of figure out. The amount of glint that I noticed he was getting as well as he was killing things was actually not trivial. So being able to do a caravan isn't going to be super hard. As far as transporting stuff, you're going to be having access to those things pretty quickly. Sorry, that was
Did we see him?
Note.
Did we see him toss out glints so he had room in his bag for?
He did.
Okay.
So, crafting's going to be fun.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Crafting is going to be fun. I wonder then, at the lower levels with harvesting and processing, what sort of fun and fine tuning and specificity they're going to be able to do. It seems like from gathering, it's potentially you can target towards higher quality or higher volumes or specific materials over others, perhaps. For processing, I'm wondering if it's going to be more of like selecting towards fuel efficiency versus output relative to input versus, again, ability to try to push for maximum quality. And at the, we just talked pretty well about crafting and all of that. But it's kind of an interesting sort of thought to me, the idea of somebody specifying towards low fuel and high output, but not towards quality, because their specific focus is throw tons of wood my way. I'm going to turn it into big ol' parcel-sized loads that we can throw on wagons and, ship them off that way. Or have them around because they know the mayor is going to be asking for a whole bunch of that type of wood because you're working in coordination with them and you're getting the next building ready. So it's going to be thousands of oak. So you've just been sitting there cranking out mediocre oak because all you need is mediocre oak. So you're out there being a mediocre oaker and thing gets done.
I did want to I got like less than 10 minutes, so I actually did want to talk about this, which was mentioned in chat, was this concept sort of within the processing side of going to an NPC and watching them do all the work, and somehow you are gaining experience through that process.
Like a learning system?
I don't know. But you're supposed to gain experience through this, right? Player, venture level experience, you get the same, So what do you all think about that? I think Diggs has already commented in chat that he's fine with it. But
yeah, Galwood asked me about that and said it was setting off alarms. Isn't Stephen the lumber miller? Why is he just watching? Yeah.
Well, it's somewhere between. I don't like the idea of people having to park their characters and stay logged in to do something. So perhaps as part of a logout system that you leave your character somewhere to observe when work is getting done. This goes back to a system that I've talked about many times over the years. The idea of logout autonomy. You can't be attacked. Nobody can pick your pocket, but you're basically kind of committed to a crafting station or a facility of some kind where you're either helping players, so they get a little bit of an assist off of you and you'll get a little assist off of that, or you're learning by observing other players. And this then would this would build into kind of a bit of a different part of the system, is your practical experience and your perhaps academic or observed experience, that the more you watch, the easier it is to build your skills up, but you don't immediately gain the skill from it, and it diminishes over time. So if you were watching somebody do a bunch of lumber milling and then you turn around and do a bunch of lumber milling, it's like a sort of additional rested XP sort of thing going on with it. But likewise, if you you go and do that and you see somebody doing whatever craft for a while, and then you go off and do something completely different, you go off and do a raid, by the time you've come back, it'll probably have worn away because you went and fought a bunch of stuff. You aren't thinking about woodworking and lumber crafting and that sort of stuff anymore. And then I guess the other part of it is the other half of it is resting, not being there crafting, being part of getting the experience, not being involved with that being part of getting the experience. That people actually, just like in real life, if you just sit there banging away on something day and night, you'll get to a point where you're not getting better at it because you're not doing it perfectly, and only perfect practice really builds your skill. So to that extent, being able to have like points, not necessarily that you have crafting exhaustion, but that if you've done some crafting and then you take a break from crafting for a little bit, it'll kind of accumulate a different sort of rested experience bonus. So between observation and doing some crafting, kind of chilling and mulling over it a bit, you can kind of come to some different ways to accelerate your stuff, but not just straight up getting skill points from it.
I'm also imagining on your freehold now the sort of rarity system and the differences of NPCs you can hire. So I assume, seeing this, that you will be able to hire multiple different types of processors, and they will all have their own little strengths and weaknesses into how they process everything. But it certainly seems weird that you are gaining experience through them. I put this in chat, and it's a good response. I had mentioned it seems to be more of a time gating thing, right? Because when you saw it was a full minute to process one oak timber, and if you're processing 20, I assume they don't want you getting bored if you have to stand there as a character while it does this for 30 minutes. And so that's the way to make you not get bored, but still have a time gate for the economy. But it definitely feels weird. I don't know. It seems weird, but I'm more curious at this point on what you can hire on your freehold, and the differences of NPCs that you can get to do those things. I'm looking forward to seeing what that's like if I ever get a freehold. So
we'll have to cross our fingers for spot testing.
I don't mean to be rude, everyone. I had to take that call.
That's good.
Oh, I did want to say something, though. Now that we've seen more and more of the systems and how they play out and how they manifest, I'm actually not as worried about Gankers. I'm actually not as worried about Gankers specifically trying to poach resources off of people. You don't know what they're collecting. You don't know how much of what they've got. You don't know what sort of force they might muster in retaliation. You don't know a lot about something when you see somebody out there crafting, or not crafting, but gathering. And I think there's going to be either easier ways to get your materials and resources through, killing things and selling materials and just buying auction house style. Or my other hope is that all the little dungeons and points of interest and little like goblin and bandit camps that pop up that you get to knock down have nice little caches of resources and materials to the point where if you're trying to find some exotic stuff for the region, stuff that's not really home to the area as much, you might just try knocking over some little enemy camps in the area and looting the treasure chest. They might have something from far away of a high quality and enough quantity to actually make one or two good things out of it. So that's what I'm kind of hoping, is that perhaps that more of the economic PvP is going to be focused on caravan combat, and caravan defense, and less on poaching individual players. Now, if you see somebody knock down that, dragon gold node in front of you and you're like, crap, I'm not going to let that dragon gold slip through my fingertips. I don't give a damn. Yeah, okay, you're going to kill that person. You might even go red for it. But you're going to get your damn dragon gold.
I want to build off that. There was something they mentioned. You had commented on not being able to tell kind of what the person was as far as a crafter or gatherer or processor. They did make a comment that you will have your gear for whatever your artisanship is, and it will live next to your combat gear. But there is an optional toggle that you can show that, hey, I am a miner. And I find it interesting that it's optional, because I would assume anyone that wants to maintain their well-being is probably not going to turn it on. And I have to think that the fact that they're...
Wait. They aren't going to turn it on while they're out gathering. They might turn it on when they're in the node.
There might be a role play
relatively
reason.
safe.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, it's unlikely that they're going to turn it on if they're worried about getting ganked. They're not going to turn on their artisan.
And my thought on this is, why would they make that choice? Is that there was such an uproar about going out and seeing and killing people that are gathering. Has this become optional because it's sort of a protective way to have some sort of protection, as if a gatherer, that I can equip gear to look like I'm a pretty good combatant when really I'm just out here trying to get some daffodils. I wonder if that's part of why they've left it as optional. Because really, if you want to promote PvP, like if you really are trying to promote economic PvP, you're going to want people to see that, hey, this person is a miner. They might have ore that I want, but they are taking away that piece of information here. So, potentially taking it away. So it's an interesting choice. And I just wonder if that's trying to offset some of the frustrations that gatherers were expressing. So,
I had this odd sort of impression in my head, and I don't even know if this was an Alpha 1 thing or not, or if I'm just imagining this, but that when you start mining or you start lumberjacking or something, it Superman poofs you into the outfit of the crafting profession stuff, and so people see what you're doing while you're doing it, and then it Superman poofs you back into your normal outfit as soon as you're done or break off. I don't know that that's a good thing. I don't know that that's a solution to anything. For some reason, I've had that image in my head for over a year. I don't know where it came from. It's probably a different game. But that's kind of the thought is, the what if you reveal your cards at the moment that you do the crafting, that you're out there and it's like, golly, that guy's got like boulder shoulders and, a boulder chain belt or whatever. He's a miner. He's a high quality miner. And then, all that stuff disappears when they're done. It would be a weird sort of thing. Mm-hmm. The thing, I hope it wouldn't say, hey, I'm a miner. But my hope is that it offers a lighter set of aesthetics that people can put on. And so instead of going out wearing armor, you can go out wearing your curated, custom crafted harvester attire, because while it's not armor, it's all pretty and unique and different, and people think it's like a skin they're not aware of or something. And meanwhile, it's going to be potentially on the lighter side, so they have a hard time discerning what your actual armor is. So, if there's something along those lines going with it, definitely I could see why people would be interested in having, the cosmetics on for their craft stuff, and basically using it as an alternative to their combat skins.
Mm-hmm.
The other interesting point, and I wonder if this will be a factor of these different sets that you can place, is the bags themselves. So will you be able to have invisible bags, like you can have, not showing your helmet? Will you be able to have cosmetic bags replace your herbalism bags? Because that's the bigger thing that is going to kind of reduce the ability to be ganked while you're out gathering. They can kill you and you can drop your stuff. That doesn't mean that they're going to have the kind of bags that will allow you to pick it up. So I guess based on the demo that we saw, they would want to be sure, if you're going to be ganking, you probably want to have bags that have at least three square stacked Tetris piece, because you can fit a one square in there, right? But if you have the 2x2, then that's not going to fit in the one that's for the lumber ones, right? So you have to be, if you're going to gank, you have to even decide what kind of bags you're going to take with you, so that you have slots for whoever it is that you gank.
A lot of shit.
Or you're willing to use the wrong size bags for things and just grab a couple and run back with them.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. You have to make sure that you can fit the pieces in.
Yeah. A crew of Gankers will have enough space.
A lot of us for figuring out. Hopefully we get to start figuring out this week. I don't know. We'll see.
Yep.
This week or next. All right. Well, we got to wrap this up. So we got, only about halfway through. So we will be back next week, and we will still have harvesting, still have processing, and some other questions to kind of go over. So, y'all, thank you for joining us. This is really fun for me, because this is all I wanted to see, is the crafting side. So, we'll be back here next Sunday. So everyone have a great week, and, join us in Discord. We're trying to play stuff together. So if you want to, we're going to Eco, Ashen's Call, Emu, Lord of the Rings online, whatever. I'm ready to play games with people. So join us. Yeah, have a good week.
See you later.